Good afternoon, and welcome to this webinar titled New Tools to Revitalize California Communities. My name is Shawnee Alford, and I'm with the Local Government Commission. Our webinar today will feature 3 speakers who will be discussing new technology and finance tools that can prime the pump for community reinvestment. Our speakers will discuss strategies for unshelving and activating city plans, including creating enhanced infrastructure finance districts and using new online tools to expedite implementation and generate place-based economic development. As always, I would like to thank our funder, the California Endowment. Before we get started, I want to go over a few logistics. Everyone will be muted except the person speaking. Due to the large number of participants, we ask that you type your questions or comments into the question box. We will be summarizing those questions during the Q&A portion following the presentations. Any of the questions we don't get to, we'll ask the presenters to respond to after the online workshop, and we will make the responses available on our website. Please note that this webinar will be recorded and will be made available on our website along with the speaker presentations. So our first speaker for today is Darin Dinsmore, founder and CEO of Crowdbright. Darin has been working with the California Forward Infrastructure Action Team to help develop new finance tools for municipalities to help implement their projects. Working collaboratively, they have launched EIFdistricts.com as an online resource to connect communities to capital. His team recently launched Infillscore.com, which has helped more than 90 cities create opportunities for smart infill. Their process includes unshelving city planning documents and helping to activate and implement them. His projects have recently been featured in Fast Company magazine. Our second speaker for today is Tony Lashbrook, town manager for Truckee. Tony has spent his 34 years working for local government in the Sierra after obtaining his degree in natural resource planning from Humboldt State University. Mr. Lashbrook was responsible for the preparation of the specific plan for the community of Mariposa that received a state and national award from the American Planning Association in 1993, and the Truckee River Revitalization Strategy, which received a state APA award in 2006. Tony has been Truckee's town manager since 2005, previously working as the Community Development Director for the newly incorporated town since 1994. And our last speaker for this webinar is Fred Silva, Senior Fiscal Policy Advisor for California Forward. Fred has over 40 years of experience in the development of public policy in state and local government, as well as in state and local finance, government operations, and the history of the state and local fiscal relationship in California. Prior to working with California Forward, Fred was a fiscal policy advisor in New California Network and previously senior advisor on governmental relations for the Public Policy Institute of California. He has authored nearly 24 publications and commentaries regarding government fiscal issues in California. So now we will hear first from Darin.
Hi, Shawnee, thanks. This is Darin Dinsmore, and we're going to go through some slides and talk a bit about some of the new tools and strategies that we developed, working with both the town of Truckee and Tony Lashbrook on the RAILYARD Master Plan project and RAILYARD partnership, and then working with Fred Silva and California Forward, specifically on the California Infrastructure Action Team. And then they're going to talk in greater detail about how do we take and move from vision to reality, and how do we get these projects on the ground. We've worked over the summer to analyze all the cities in California that may be looking at using new financial tools such as EIFDs or enhanced infrastructure finance districts, kind of as redevelopment 2.0, if you will, to help revitalize their communities, but really realized that a lot of communities might need help or assistance in first grounding their projects, identifying priorities, and building strong cases of public support before moving into the financing and infrastructure side of the equation. So we've launched a couple of new online tools that are really meant for public education tools and professional tools. The first one we're going to talk about is Infill Score, and then Tony's going to talk about practical application of those ideas for Truckee. And then we're going to talk about the California EIFD online tool. Next slide, please. So we've launched infillscore.com. It's a free tool for planners, elected officials, public works to use to kind of do a diagnosis and understand where they currently are today in terms of setting up their community to be more infill friendly and determine their infill readiness. There's 30 strategies that were identified in a EPA report called Attracting Infill Development in Distressed Communities. It's a fantastic report. It's available on the EPA website. And we basically took that, the work of the California Planning Roundtable on Infill that Tony's going to talk about, and turned it into a self-service tool that cities can use to kind of do their own diagnosis and assessment. And the whole idea was making it fun and easy to use and helping cities determine strategies, become more proactive, and do more with less because we've got less funding than we have had in the past. Next slide, please. So you may have received this invitation to try the new smart infill planning tool, Infill Score. We've had 100 cities in the last month since the launch complete the score and use the initial tool. And we have a national team of advisors, including Jeff Speck, Tony, Fred Silva, members of the Local Government Commission and the Urban Land Institute, helping us to advise us in the process. I think what's really important is it's really just a tool to determine your infill readiness, but then you really need to take action. There's different ways of taking action in your community. It may be involving developing a strong plan and building public support, and there's tools and strategies for doing that. Secondly, you may have a plan or have done a lot of planning that are sitting on shelves. You can use these tools and strategies to unshelve your plans and activate them and to attract investment into your community. And then lastly, there's tools such as EIFDs and a rapid assessment protocol that we've developed to help cities very quickly generate the capital they need to implement their projects and build and revitalize their communities. Next slide, please. So if you go and use the tool, you can actually find and download the evaluation form, and it's really organized around 6 key areas: determining your community priorities for reinvestment and opportunity sites for infill, aligning policies to be infill supportive, creating new partnerships for practical application and implementation, reinvestment in local communities and changing the perception of place. And Tony's going to talk a little bit about what they've done in their downtown, their RAILYARD master plan, and they've done some initial streetscape improvements in their downtown and creek restoration to sort of set the framework and build positive energy around the downtown for reinvestment. Once you've got that strong foundation, you can then move into different funding tools and finance tools. And the first tier of strategies of the 30 strategies gets into funding for infill, and then lastly, infrastructure finance, which Fred is going to talk about. Next slide, please. So we developed a scoring system because there really was no methodology for comparing cities within the state of California or within the country, and having them understand and share resources with each other and lessons learned and what they're doing. So really it's about creating that baseline, overcoming obstacles to progress in a streamlined way, building support, identifying priorities, and then attracting finance and capital. Next slide, please. On the Infill Score tool, we've had 1,450 cities sign up. Now, as of this morning, over 100 cities have completed step 1. 400 have started it, but a lot have realized that they need to have a lot of information at their disposal to complete the process. It takes about 10 minutes. We've had users in 28 states and 7 countries. And I think this is really showing the shift in the priority towards infill development and the demand from cities to understand best practices and learn from each other and their resources. And this is a little example of a certificate that the cities get for receive for completing their process. Next slide, please. When you take your infill score, there's an algorithm in there, and it really goes through and it looks at where are the weakest areas in your community, and then provides recommendations on areas of improvement. So these are the 6 basic categories about developing a broad and shared public vision that's supported and has identified infill sites, policy frameworks, and as we mentioned, partnerships, placemaking, and then infill finance, and then infrastructure. Within each of these strategy areas, there are 9 to 10 potential actions that communities can take. So there's a whole suite of tools to actually help you develop your own roadmap going forward once you actually have your score. Next slide, please. So once you get your assessment, you get your certificate, then you can go to the roadmap tool, analyze all the different 195 options for your community to take, and then develop your own roadmap for progress and how you're going to move forward, revitalize your community, and attract investment. Next slide, please. So really, we've been working with more than 90 cities over the last 4 years to really get from vision to reality and help them build and implement their plans. In a lot of communities, the first part is a real lack of public support and broad public support for a bold vision for the future. Other communities are struggling with a stagnant economy, and now that things are coming back, they're trying to reactivate the plans that have been sitting on shelves and implement them. And others are really focused on meeting those financial gaps around infrastructure and project finance. We're working with a variety of communities along each stage of that process. In Las Vegas, Anaheim, and Brea, we're working right now through community visioning and planning. In South Lake Tahoe, we recently unshelved and activated 2,500 pages of plans into an online app that prioritizes investment strategies. And then in Truckee, right now, they're obviously at the implementation stage with their RAILYARD project that Tony will talk about. Next slide, please. In terms of Las Vegas, I know this isn't a California example, but Las Vegas is using new approaches and online tools to engage the public in a broad community-based approach to revitalizing their downtown and using infill score to make strategic decisions on where those investments should be. Next slide, please. And in South Lake Tahoe, this is their 50th anniversary of incorporation, and we helped them create an online tool that you can go to called sltunshelved.net that lets you see the plans, the recent plans that have been approved, their priority projects, their ideas, the projects that are in progress, and the projects that are completed, and then has a tracking system to track their progress over time. Next slide, please. And just moving on to Truckee, Tony Lashbrook's going to talk in detail about this case study and all the work they've been doing to help revitalize their downtown and their RAILYARD project. And right now they're focusing on infill and infrastructure finance. If we would have had the infill score tool back in the day, they would have scored, I think Tony said, a 65 back in 2000. They've taken a lot of actions that are all listed here over the last 15 years to prime the pump for reinvestment and set the stage for success, and right now have a score of 85, and that's resulting in potential reinvestment in their downtown of $250 million. And I'm going to pass it over to City Manager of the town of Truckee, Tony Lashbrook, to talk about their project and program.
All right, thank you, Darin. This is Tony Lashbrook, and we can go to the next slide here. My job will be to tell you why a guy from a small town in the Sierra is talking to you about infill, so I'm going to tell a bit of a story here. This is downtown Truckee, a National Register Historic District located just about 12 miles north of Lake Tahoe. It is a urban village, or was historically an urban village located adjacent to transit, in this case the Transcontinental Railroad, and you can see the train depot on the left of that photo. So we have a history of compact development served by transit that we strayed away from. Next slide. So this map that you're looking at reflects the town of Truckee at about the time of incorporation, which was in 1993. It's 34 square miles, 20,000 acres if you think of it that way. There was about 13,000 parcels served by 150 miles of road, serving about 10,000 residents. So kind of a model of sprawl, and you can see that reflected on this map. If we go to the next slide, one of the occurrences that happened right before incorporation was the closure of a very large sawmill, lumber mill in downtown Truckee, and this signaled a couple of things. Probably most significantly, it was the conversion of the final step in the conversion of an economy that was based upon resource extraction to one that was based upon valuing the resources and our environmental natural resources in place. And so this sawmill, which covered about 30 acres, closed in 1989, just a couple of years before incorporation, kind of indicating a major shift of gears in Truckee. And our downtown is immediately on the left side of this aerial photo. Go ahead to the next slide. This is another photo, different angle, same site. So you can see now what we call the Truckee RAILYARD, which is where that lumber mill was located, in our downtown. Immediately west of that, or more towards the middle of the photo. So creating this huge opportunity site just adjacent to our downtown, and this happened right on the cusp of incorporation. We can go to the next slide. So kind of what set the stage for a pretty small community to look at aggressive infill policy? So a few things happened that I think were important. First, the incorporation was driven in large part by a desire to seize control of planning and growth. There was a very unpopular big box store approved by the county in Truckee that the locals did not have an interest in. They challenged it, it went away, and incorporation happened pretty quickly thereafter. And so there was a really strong local interest in good planning, and probably for someone that came from other small towns in the Sierra, a stronger commitment than even an experienced planner might have expected. So my job when I came to Truckee in 1994 was to do all the planning, kind of throw out the county stuff. We want a new general plan, new downtown specific plan, new zoning. We want to chart our own course, and so that's what we did. Really, what I'll be talking about with the RAILYARD was an opportunity to double the size of the existing downtown on that recently closed sawmill site, and that vision actually came from citizen involvement. So we can go to the next slide. So in 1995 and 1996, as we were working on our town-wide general plan, we were also working on a downtown specific plan, and we did a vision process using some, at the time, innovative processes for public involvement. There are much better processes available now because of technology and social media. But we involved over 600 members of our community in developing this vision for the downtown. As you look at the cover of this plan, you can see the RAILYARD in the kind of upper right area of the map that's in the middle of the cover. And really, our community came up with this notion that we could plan for several hundred residential units and several 100,000 square feet of mixed-use development on a site directly adjacent to our downtown as a kind of an alternative to the sprawl that had occurred over the decades of 1960, 70, and 80, and really providing an opportunity to promote smart growth and create a different pattern of development that more closely resembled the historic pattern in our downtown. Go ahead to the next slide. So just a few observations on laying the groundwork. The general plan and downtown specific plan identified the rail yard as a key opportunity site. So we had our most important policy documents setting the stage for future work. They also set initial policies for infill, for mixed use, and higher density and intensity of use on the site than we had really anywhere else in town. They directed us to pursue a redevelopment as a key strategy to encourage infill and to eliminate blight that we had in our community. We prepared and adopted that redevelopment plan in 1998. But we had setbacks. In about the same time we approved the redevelopment plan, Union Pacific Railroad purchased Southern Pacific Railroad. Union Pacific was much more interested in running trains than selling real estate. They were the owner of this rail yard site, and so it stalled. But we kept pushing, and we were successful in 2003 in getting a grant from the State Treasurer's Office. At that point, kind of leading the charge on sustainable development. And that caught the attention of the railroad and of an infill developer, so the seller and the buyer in this site. And the funding we got through that grant in conjunction with the purchase of the site by Holiday Development allowed us to do master planning in partnership. And the funding we received there really allowed us to hire a project coordinator, public outreach coordinator, and really engage the community on an appropriate plan reflecting those higher density and intensity of uses, but something that the Truckee community could embrace. So that process, after much fanfare, led to the adoption of the Rail Yard Master Plan in 2009. We did receive a CEQA challenge, which we prevailed on, but that plan provides for appropriate density and flexibility related to land use, density and flexibility both on land use and parking to encourage infill and provide flexibility for future needs. So I think the key points there: aggressive planning, a lot of community engagement. We actually had every living mayor that ever served the town of Truckee support this plan at its final hearing in front of the town council. If we can go to the next slide. Obviously, the master plan was approved right about the time the recession really bore down on the state, and that impacted our ability to move forward. We did apply about that time for Prop 1C, that would be housing money to provide infrastructure for affordable housing. Even though our application was very competitive, we were denied on a technicality, which I could go into in detail, but won't. And then shortly thereafter, redevelopment was terminated. So, wow, all of our best laid plans were foiled by a couple of decisions at the state level. But we kept moving, and we did other things. As Darin said, we really targeted capital improvement expenditures downtown, and our council provided key direction on that. And we, using both redevelopment, a general fund, and traffic impact fee money to do that. And we kept pursuing every possible infrastructure grant opportunity, both by ourselves, the developer pursuing it, or in partnership, depending on the grant source. We had many failures, but we had a few big wins. In fact, we did receive $4 million of Prop 1C funding, along with $8 million of AHSC, Affordable Housing Sustainable Community funding through the first round of cap and trade grants that went out earlier this summer. So wrapping up here, go to the next slide. We are right now processing entitlements for phase 1 of the rail yard. This project is a mixed-use project, as was envisioned. Phase 1, this particular building proposes movie theaters, something that we sorely need in our community, wrapped with market rate housing. A block to the east is an artist loft affordable housing project proposal, and east of that is a proposed grocery store. So we're hoping to move forward with construction starting next spring. Next slide. Just to wrap up, I am a member of the California Planning Roundtable and the co-lead on our Infill project. The Roundtable really grabbed on to Infill as a new project because of some setbacks we have seen across the state, and we wanted to really study the barriers to infill. And so in a project that we've just launched, and the website is shown there at the bottom of the screen, we'll be looking at a series of issues and obstacles to infill, including community acceptance, infrastructure, use of impact fees, parking standards, social equity, and regulatory barriers. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Darin, and we'll go from here.
Great, thanks, Tony. If we can get up the EIFD slides, that would be fantastic. So I just want to say it's been a pleasure working with Tony on the RAILYARD project, and also watching this plan and project unfold over the years. And I think Fred Silva from California Forward is also going to say the importance of looking at new tools and new finance tools is to have a strong, approved, and publicly supported plan. And I think we can really see in the work that Tony and Truckee did in setting the policy framework, in setting the guidelines, in being proactive in creating a public-private partnership, seeking all types of different funding sources. They really laid a good foundation for the project that is leading to the revitalization of their downtown and their community. I'm going to very quickly go through some slides on enhanced infrastructure finance districts. A lot of these are on a website that's www.eifdistricts.com. This is a work in progress that's going to evolve over time and improve as citizens or communities contribute ideas in their projects to the tool, and we look towards it as being a resource for the implementation of these finance districts throughout the state. So the online tool really lets you explore the policy framework, which was Senate Bill SB 628 that was signed into law last fall, and new cleanup legislation that helps streamline the process of creating the enhanced infrastructure finance districts that was recently signed by the governor. And Fred's going to talk about that in a little bit more detail. Then we've got on the online tool an interactive map where we're going to be hosting potential EIFD projects and ones that are in progress, and then getting into greater detail. Next slide, please. I think one of the most important aspects of looking at new finance tools and mechanisms, especially with the dissolution of redevelopment in California, is building public trust and the trust of elected officials, planning commissioners, and leadership. So this is really meant as this online tool as a public education tool first. And on the online tool, you can go in, explore, and interact with it on your computer, on your phone, and really find out what you can and can't do with the tools and the finance mechanisms. Next slide, please. We're creating the first community-sourced EIFD map, and we would encourage all communities to go onto that map. You can do this today, right now, and drag and drop. If you're thinking about using EIFDs, drag and drop the marker on the map. If you have one in progress, we'd love to hear from you. Drag that onto the map as well, and then you can describe it in the notes about the project. Next slide, please. So there are a number of communities, all told. I think Fred might have better numbers, but I think there are 25 communities right now currently working on or actively looking at enhanced infrastructure finance districts to meet gaps in both their capital improvement program and a revitalization program for their communities. Some special districts are also looking at them as well, and we have some of those folks on the line today. So who can create EIFDs? Cities and towns, counties, and special districts, but it's an opt-in, and the different districts and taxing agencies need to opt in into the process. One caveat is that EIFDs cannot take revenue from schools or community college districts. This example on the left is the Highway 50 Community Revitalization Project in South Lake Tahoe that we're working on. They might be looking at this as a tool for helping to meet financial gaps in their project and help to implement their plan for the future. Next slide, please. A couple of points about EIFDs is you first need to determine the boundaries of them, and that's quite flexible. You do not need to determine blight like you did with redevelopment. And that the facilities do not need to be actually located within the district itself if there's a broader community benefit. And that you can use up to 10% of that increment for planning work to be done to set the stage for the district. Next slide, please. So I think what's really exciting about infrastructure finance districts is the flexibility that they employ in creating a public financing authority, and it really enables you to do a lot of different things that other financial tools weren't available to cities before or in the past. Quick analysis of opportunities in California. We analyzed all cities in California over the summer, looking at the potential revenue share that they would generate from an EIFD. And there are about what we call green light cities. 108 cities are green light cities that would generate over 15% of the revenue that would go back locally into their local coffers for project or infrastructure investment. We really think a lot of these communities are going to be moving very quickly to use this new finance tool and mechanism, and especially in a hot real estate market where property values are going up, it may make sense to determine the boundaries of these districts and to create the actual district itself right now and cap the property tax revenue so that it can begin growing over time while we're in a hot real estate market. Next slide, please. So what are some of the things that you can use the EIF district to fund? These are just some small little infographics that we developed for parks and open space, affordable housing, transit priority areas that are identified in your sustainable community strategies, brownfield restoration, military base remediation, water and wastewater infrastructure, critical right now, and some of the special districts in the state are looking at this. You cannot use it for maintenance and repairs, but you can also use it for transit and walkable communities and highway and arterial streets as well. Next slide, please. We think there are some very creative approaches that cities can use and special districts can use to conduct what we're calling a rapid assessment of an EIFD opportunity, where it might not have to take 6 months and a very detailed study to figure it out. So as long as we understand what the goals of the community are and what approved plans there are, what type of EIFD they're looking at, what are the opportunity sites for redevelopment and investment that would create the tax increment and what that increment would be, what the revenue share of those cities and special districts currently are, and we've calculated that working with California Forward for all the cities in the state. And Fred's going to talk a bit about that in greater detail. And then what are the current gaps and needs in the funding? This graphic just quickly shows the 5 different types. So you may have a very large multi-jurisdictional project, such as the LA River project, where it reaches across jurisdiction boundaries. And that may be, and they're looking at currently using an EIFD to fund that. that will be subject to a large public vote and campaign to get that approved. Other cities are looking at citywide districts for using the EIFD. That may be a case of a medium-sized city, for instance, where there are a lot of gaps in their capital improvement program, and they could draw the boundary citywide, again, go for a vote, and then use that to implement a variety of their projects and have some flexibility. What a lot of communities, especially smaller cities, are going to be doing is looking at very targeted approaches to creating EIFDs, or maybe the voting requirements when they go for bonding might not be as arduous, and looking at very specific sites. So it could be looking at redevelopment, former redevelopment area sites. Actually, I made a mistake. Number 4 should be focused areas within your community, such as a Main Street district or corridor. And number 5, targeted opportunity sites that are non-contiguous. So Tony was talking about their RAILYARD project. The town of Truckee also has an old corporation yard on the river. The town of Truckee, if they're considering an EIFD, may want to only draw the boundary around those 2 areas, as those are the areas that are going to create the greatest tax increment through redevelopment over time, and then reinvest that back into either housing or infrastructure for their project. Next slide, please. Mammoth Lakes is currently looking at and has studied a variety of approaches to creating EIFDs. They've been working on a downtown specific plan, a vision plan, and trying to figure out how they're going to implement it. So they've done a quick study. I think it's one of the best case studies for this idea of a rapid assessment, where they're looking at different boundaries of potential EIFD areas. And as you can see on the map, there's the former redevelopment area, the focused areas, and then targeted sites. And they're currently running the numbers and looking at the increment that would be created and how that would be reinvested in the community. Next slide, please. So again, there's a real targeted approach to a rapid assessment of EIFD opportunities. You need to know where your gaps, where your goals are, what are the specific types that you're looking at, match that up with the opportunity sites, the potential increase in revenue from the new development and increment that would be generated from those sites. Next slide, please. So in the analysis that was completed over the summer, we worked by taking the AD8 share and the vehicle license backfill fee with Fred Silva, and really looking at, which cities should be looking at EIFDs as a potential tool for financial solution for infrastructure. And we've kind of analyzed and come up with a sort of red light cities, yellow light cities, and red light cities. The green light cities should be cities that may be considering moving today. They're going to get 15% or more of the revenue, and they could lock that in today with the new AB 313, streamline a process for creating an EIFD, quickly study alternatives, do a rapid assessment, and move forward. Communities that are getting somewhere between 9 and 14%, like Mammoth, may want to look at an approach where they need to reach out to other taxing entities, such as special districts, the county fire districts, water agencies, work collaboratively with them to determine their priorities, and then look towards the opportunities and what they're going to use the tool and the financing mechanisms for. And then cities that are receiving less than 9% are really going to have to negotiate with the special districts, work together and collaborate to figure out how they're going to specifically use this tool and the public financing authority to achieve their goals. Next slide, please. Fred's going to talk about this in greater detail, but the process of creating an EIFD is fairly simple and has also recently been streamlined. But it first involves creating an EIFD authority or public financing authority, adopting a resolution of intent to form an EIFD, and then developing a detailed infrastructure and financing plan that will move towards implementation. And with that, I want to turn this over to the policy advisor for California Forward, Fred Silva, to talk about the background and the details.
Hi, thanks, Darin. This is Fred Silva with California Forward. Next slide, please. A part of the backdrop for this, of course, was the elimination of redevelopment. And in 2013, as part of the Economic Summit, the question arose with a variety of folks engaged in both economic development and civic engagement about what to do in a post-redevelopment world. And they came to the conclusion that what should the agenda for economic development ought to be centered on a broader authority than simply the narrowness of the old redevelopment tool. So coming out of the summit in 2013, the recommendation that was made to both the governor and the legislature was to have a broader authority using the old infrastructure financing districts as a model for expanding the authority of communities to invest in infrastructure. Next slide, please. And so rather than using the old redevelopment model, the idea was to either on a single jurisdiction basis, which we're talking about mostly today in an infill development style economic development, or on a multi-jurisdictional basis where there's a broader set of investments that are made. Either one, this tool would be useful for. Next slide, please. And there are a variety of tools that just within the statutory authority of the EIFD, which is an independent entity, again, as Darin mentioned, which is set up by the governing body of either a city or a county, with the participation of other affected entities that want to bring resources to the table. And these are all authorities, many of which you all recognize, but are brought together in the statute. This is an extension of the Joint Powers Authority theory that says that entities can come together to use shared powers. In this case, this is not a set of shared powers. These are independent powers that are available to the EIFD. Next slide, please. And I want to focus a little bit on property tax and tax increment. We've known the redevelopment model for a long time. Provision went into the Constitution in the 1950s that allowed a redevelopment agency to have access to other entities' property tax levies. So if a school had a levy of 0.5%, then the redevelopment agency was able to capture growth on that 0.5%. If the county had a 1% tax rate, then the entity had access to it under a provision in the Constitution. Time passed, and local agencies lost the power to levy property taxes independently, and Prop 13 produced a 1% rate. The legislature was given plenary power for how that tax would be allocated, which underlies the property tax increment system that is included in the EIFD that is not included in other statutes. And basically, there are two sources of growth that can be used for the investments that Darin talked about earlier. The first is the so-called ABH share, which many of you may be familiar with, which I think, Tony, the city of Truckee has about a 15% share of growth, if I have that number right. Hopefully that's maybe an order of magnitude number. So it receives the property tax through its regular property tax allocation. But in addition to that, the community also receives property tax through what's known as the backfill from the reduction in the vehicle license fee. And it happens that cities that had redevelopment agencies that have enforceable obligations that are taking a portion of the growth in their property tax and continuing to pay for those enforceable obligations, their ABH share is likely to grow slower than the vehicle license fee backfill. So as a city looks at the available tax increment that can be used for these purposes, they need to look at two parts. One is the amount of property tax that's attributable to the so-called ABH share, out of which is paid their enforceable obligations, but also for the property tax they receive from the vehicle license fee backfill, which is connected to the economic growth of the community, because that amount grows by the growth in gross assessed value. So it is not netted out from the reductions that are otherwise attributable to either the ERAF transfer or to the resources that are sent over to enforceable obligations. So these are two elements that can be used for investment in economic development and other infrastructure activities that are allowable under the statute, which Darin summarized nicely. For those, next slide, please. For those of you who want to continue to follow this work, we have the annual Economic Summit coming up in November 2012 and 13 in the Inland Empire. I'll give you a quick plug for that. You can register and attend to that by going to www.caeconomy.org. And Shawnee, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Fred, and thank you to all of our speakers, Darin, Tony, and Fred, for taking time out to speak with us today. I'm going to open up for a Q&A, so I'm checking to see if anyone has any questions for our speakers. Please put that into the questions area of the panel that is up, and I will read that off to our speakers. So we're going to go ahead and unmute everyone. So one question is there any movement around utilizing an EIFD for broadband deployment?
Hi, this is Fred. Clearly the opportunity is there. I have not seen one of those, but the more that people talk about this new set of authorities, then hopefully you'll see some broadband work from it. It's clearly authorized in the statute.
All right. And then another question is about presentations being posted. Yes, all presentations and the recording of this webinar will be posted to our website. So I will be following up with everyone in attendance, and I will send you that link. Another question is, any advice or thoughts related to AB2 and how this relates?
Yeah, this is Fred again, a very good question. AB2 is a very focused authority. It has only access to the so-called AB8 share. It does not have access to the VLF backfill property tax. And I suspect there will be communities that will want to use that in a very focused manner because the criteria for setting up a community revitalization and investment authority is pretty narrow. It tends to be quite urban. And as Darin mentioned earlier, it's likely to be used by only a handful of cities that have a significantly large share of the property tax. Statewide, the average for cities is still on the AB8 share is under 10%. The vehicle license fee has bolstered that, but again, the AB2 doesn't have access to the VLF backfill property tax.
Great. Our next question is, can an EIFD be used to pay for projects related to preventing stormwater pollution, such as infiltration projects, rain gardens, etc.?
Yeah, a good question. It happens, I've participated in a conference with the Stormwater Quality Association, and a lot of discussion about using this tool for stormwater and related green projects. As the questioner is probably aware, there's a lot of activity going on about that, and this is a tool we think is quite useful for that purpose.
This next question is for Darin. Do the stakeholders you work with engage in their communities for feedback? And if so, does your tool sync in with that process?
Yeah, so Infill Score is just the assessment tool. We build custom tools with Crowdbright for cities to engage both their stakeholders, property owners, and the broader public in projects. And there's about 90 of them on the website crowdbright.net, and a map of projects as well. In particular, we're working with 25 cities on their downtown plans right now, using the tools to help both create a digital plan, make it interactive, understandable, and help build support.
Next question is, we have a multiple number of projects and needs for these types of investments in, I guess, that's San Francisco. Example would be South Boulevard, 19th Avenue, Transit, and several others in a residential area. Do you already work with San Francisco Planning Department on these areas, or do we get our local supervisors to push for the implement the EIFD first?
This is Fred again. I think what you'll need to do, and I'm familiar with the San Francisco set of issues, they used an IFD for the improvements that were made for America's Cup several years ago. Because there's so many activities going on, and it happens that San Francisco has a significantly large share of the property tax. So attributing a piece of increment to the general economic development of San Francisco is quite workable. So I think your first interest would be to chat with the city about their interest in using EIFDs. We have spoken with them about this in the past.
Yeah, this is Darin. We're working with the Rec and Parks Department on their master plan. They are looking at this, but they currently have their own bonding process for generating funds for park and water quality implementation.
Great. And so our next question, is it possible to have an EIFD on a multi-jurisdictional scale, a city-wide scale, and a smaller scale simultaneously?
Sure. One of the things we tried to do coming out of the elimination of redevelopment was to set up as flexible a model as possible. And so the first question that Darin spoke to it earlier is, what's the objective? What are you trying to do? What are the community goals? And what governments are active in that way? A good example is the Santa Clara Valley Transit Authority that is working on the extension of BART down into San Jose and up into the city of Santa Clara. And so there's an interest in not only the city and its priorities, but also the county and the transit agency. So the system is flexible enough that you can design the governance model and its financing tools in a way that meets local needs.
Are there limitations on EIFDs based on median area income similar to AB2 limitations?
Short answer is no, because this is a flexible financing authority. Again, it can be used to match the infrastructure needs. AB2 was designed as a more focused set of issues. The criteria for setting up an EIFD deals both with unemployment, high incidence of crime, and obviously you start with median income. Those standards are not at play in the EIFD.
Are there substantial and rigorous sustainable development standards that enhance the shift in funding to make the participation better and stronger, thereby saving future funds?
This is Fred again. One of the authorities here is financing of development under SB 375. Obviously, if a community is moving in that direction, they'll use that authority in a sustainable way. We're hoping that this is a framework for sustainability over time.
This is Darin. Yeah, we're kind of seeing all of these different funding pots kind of merge together. If you look at, with Tony and Truckee receiving cap and trade funds, they obviously are going to have to be tracking their performance metrics around GHGs and other reductions. But other agencies such as the Port of San Diego that we're working with already have their own performance metrics and system for moving towards sustainability. And adding in EIFDs into that process, they can merge together the new financing tool and to move forward on implementation of their capital improvement program and use their existing performance metric framework to track that progress moving forward. Another good tool that's out there that came out of the work at the Olympics in Canada and out of Portland is eco districts, and they've been working on their own framework. But I think the best ones are the ones that achieve the financing goals that are coming from the state and targets, but also coming from the community themselves.
This is Tony. I might just add on to that. Because of our geography, we were not mandated to do greenhouse gas emissions analysis or climate action planning. But certainly, in our view, it seems like all of the significant state funding is going to go through that filter sooner rather than later. So we are moving to catch up to do that work right now, even though we've got a variety of policies and programs that are help to achieve climate action planning goals. We don't have a formal plan, so we think we need to move on that right now and are doing so. So I think that's really important.
So this next question is for Tony. It says, congratulations on the RAILYARDS project. At build out, how many residential units and commercial square footage is envisioned, and over what period of time?
Yeah, great question. And one of the things we're processing right now is an amendment to that master plan. I'll talk about the existing improved plan. It's on the order of about 700 residential units and about an equal about 700,000 square feet of kind of mixed use space that might range anywhere from work live to commercial, retail, service commercial, and light industrial. The build out would is projected over 20 years.
Next question, downtowns tend to suck up all the investment and tax money, leaving surrounding districts clawing for money. How can we enforce equitable tax investment in the smaller communities?
This is Tony. I'll take that one first. I do, so we've had that experience, and certainly our council got really focused on the downtown out of our relative infancy, and that became a priority for capital funding. Part of the reason, we inherited a background of county planning that supported greenfield development, and we wanted to try to shift that energy to the downtown. We just started within the last year moving west out of our downtown along a neglected corridor of Donner Pass Road, which is really our primary arterial, to expand that investment out of our downtown corridor. I mean, I guess I would say there's very limited resources to go around, and you've got to carefully think through your priorities about where you want to invest them.
Just, I guess, a lesson learned. We're working with South Lake Tahoe, which is a little more population than Truckee, but very much spread out, and they're really having to focus on which priority areas and priority investment areas they're going to make those improvements. And with the revenue streams that they currently have, they can really only look at one or two of those at a time.
Next question is, I believe this is for Darin. You showed a graphic indicating that there are some cities ready to go to implement EIFDs. Is this information public, and have you talked to each?
That's a good question. No, we haven't talked to each. If you email me, what we're going to do is we're going to break that down actually by region, because we think a lot of these COGs should be taking a leadership role in having convenings and bringing together different communities to talk about EIFDs and their implementation, and we can make that available.
Okay, so I will make sure that your contact information is sent in a follow-up so they can contact you. So the next question is, those outlying BART stations along with major transit hub planning tend to take money away from downtown, and the need to finance existing transit platforms needing replacement and community planning Example is Balboa Park Station area plan and Balboa Reservoir and Upper Yard. It's hard to control the funding equitably when specific interest groups cipher off the funding or use slush funds to fund some projects preferred by, for example, downtown power groups. So often, smaller size EIFDs, infrastructure projects get ignored. What ways can we use, besides community pure outrage, to get municipalities to use this tool to plan equitably?
This is Darin. I might have a go at that. We first sort of Infill score came out of a project we were working on over the summer, looking at all the capital improvement programs in the state and where the gaps were. And there we looked at 15,000 projects. And as part of that process, we found that only, I think it was 7% of the jurisdictions actually make their capital improvement program easily available to the public in maybe some type of interactive online map. Mm-hmm. And there's a real gap between the long-term planning strategies from the planning departments and the capital improvement programs generally run by Public Works. We really feel there needs to be a transformation of capital improvement programs 2.0 becoming digital, online, participatory budgeting, things like that. And that's part of the project in the South Lake Tahoe example that is sort of taking steps in that direction.
Okay, and then we have a follow-up to an earlier question that asked about the substantial, rigorous, sustainable development standards that enhance the shift in funding to make the participation better and stronger. And how many are designated as affordable? That's the follow-up. How many are designated as affordable?
With respect to that, the resources available to the EIFD are for affordable housing. And there isn't a specific set aside. It's simply a case of where the project includes housing, that the assistance provided by the EIFD is for affordable housing.
All right, it seems like that is all of our questions. And if anyone has any follow-up questions, you could either direct those towards me, or I'll be sending out a follow-up email and I'll provide the contact information of our speakers, and so you can reach out to them directly if need be. So again, I want to thank our three speakers today for spending some time out speaking with us about this important tool. I did want to plug some of our upcoming local government commission events as we continue the conversation about identifying effective and innovative strategies and tools for getting good projects on the ground. We'll be hosting a series of workshops titled New Funding Strategies to Fuel Smart Growth Successes. They will be one in San Diego, November 12th, followed by Long Beach, November 13th, and in Oakland on November the 20th. And we will be hearing from several experts from across the state, including those on today's webinar on relevant tools, strategies, and case studies that will be highlighted in the Local Government Commission's new Innovative Funding Guidebook, which will be released soon. And I have provided a link at the bottom for those that are interested in receiving more information or registering. And again, the recording and presentations from today's webinars will be made available on our website at lgc.org. So I thank everyone and have a good day.